many other...
This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks, and these are the top headlines of this Wednesday. At least 6 people are dead after a gunman opened fire in a Walmart store in the U.S. state of Virginia. The suspect is also dead. Russia rains down volleys of missiles across Ukraine, hitting infrastructure in Kiev and other cities, as Moscow pursues its campaign to knock out the country's power and heat as winter advances. The European Parliament declares Russia a state sponsor of terrorism over its brutal acts in Ukraine. Turkey says it is more determined than ever to secure its Syrian border from attacks by Kurdish forces. It threatens a ground operation at the most convenient time. And world number one Iga Świątek calls for a probe into sexual harassment allegations against the president of Poland's tennis federation. It has happened, of course, again. Yet another mass shooting in the United States of America. This time, a gunman killed 6 people in a Walmart supermarket in the south of the U.S. state of Virginia. According to police officials, the suspected shooter is also dead, believed to be a store manager who opened fire, then turned the gun on himself. The attack took place at 10:15 p.m. local time in the city of Chesapeake, just as shoppers were continuing to stock up for the Thanksgiving holiday here later this week. The Chesapeake police say rapid response officers entered the store immediately upon receiving reports of the attack. Louise Lucas, a member of Virginia's Senate, has described herself as absolutely heartbroken. On Twitter, she said, "I will not rest until we find the solutions to end this gun violence epidemic in America." The mayor of Chesapeake called the attack senseless. Walmart, which still sells weaponry and ammunition to customers over the age of 21, described itself as shocked at this tragic event. The Walmart shooting comes just days after a gunman opened fire at an LGBTQ night spot in the U.S. state of Colorado. 5 people were killed and 17 others injured in that attack. Joining us live now with more on this latest gun violence assault on innocent Americans, our U.S. correspondent Susan Tehrani. She's in New York. Susan, I mean, I don't really know what to say. I mean, this happens now constantly. We had the July 4th shooting attacks in Highland Park, Illinois. Nothing's been done about any of these. We're about to see a change up on Capitol Hill, the Democrats retaining control of the Senate, the Republicans taking control of the House of Representatives. Nothing's going to happen, right?
So tragic, you know, these places where
traditionally and generally human beings, Americans, feel safe. You know, we talk about schools, we talk about supermarkets, we talk about a place like Walmart, really, so close to Thanksgiving. So many people there. Investigation is still ongoing about this incident. This was seen to be a disgruntled Walmart employee. He killed 6 people, 4 other people are injured. We don't know if he had a motive yet, but as you mentioned, you know, there are so many different avenues where something like this can be addressed. His weapon was a pistol. Oftentimes it is, you know, semi-automatic weapons. And then there is the issue of the mental health crisis that's so prevalent across the country. So really it has to come from the federal government if there is some kind of solution to this senseless violence. But, you know, time and again, we get news like this.
We certainly do. Susan, stay with us. We're going to come back to you on another story in just a moment, because just a week after former US President Donald Trump announced his bid to recapture the White House, a new opinion poll shows that nearly 60% of Americans say they don't want him back. But nearly 50% of people questioned think it is likely that he could succeed in his quest. The poll was conducted for Quinnipiac University. It shows that most Americans view the former president's presidential run as a negative, but among Republicans, 70% said his impact on the midterms was positive. Poll participants were split on whether Trump was likely to win another presidential election. 18% said very likely, 31% said somewhat likely, 48% said they don't think he'll win. When asked about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, another Republican widely expected to enter the race for the party's presidential nomination, 43% said they would prefer to see him becoming the party's standard bearer for 2024. Meanwhile, the US Supreme Court has once again cleared the way for Donald Trump's tax returns to be released to the Ways and Means Committee of the House of Representatives. It, like the House of Representatives, is currently, of course, controlled by Democrats, but only until the end of this year. The Supreme Court's order is the second defeat handed down to Trump by the 9-member bench within a span of a few weeks. In October, the justices rejected Trump's bid to block a lower court's ruling that granted the panel's request for his financial records. The Ways and Means Committee should now be clear to receive copies of Trump's tax returns from the U.S. Treasury. The former president has sought to shield them for years and was the first U.S. presidential nominee in 4 decades not to make his tax returns public for voters to assess. So, back to WION's U.S. correspondent Susan Teherani. I mean, Susan, is this finally it, or are we going to see more efforts to delay and obfuscate by the former president? After all, the clock is ticking. Republicans will be taking over the Ways and Means Committee and the rest of the House of Representatives on January the 3rd.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Donald Trump was hoping for, to delay this for an appeals from the Supreme Court until the Republicans take over, and then it would be literally a dead-on arrival. And as you mentioned, once the Republicans do take over, it's really yet to be seen how far this will go. But then there is another side to all of this. First of all, the Ways and Means Committee has said that they may not make these tax returns public. And second of all, how much more are we really going to learn more about Donald Trump's financial dealings if these tax returns are made public? And what does this committee want to do with these tax returns? Remember, it's not a requirement and it's not against the law for presidents or presidential candidates not to disclose their tax returns. It's something that's done voluntarily. So, you know, while the decision means that the Treasury Department will likely hand over about 6 years of tax returns to the House, and, you know, this is sort of a quote-unquote win since 2019, really we have to ask the question, what will it mean? Nancy Pelosi said that hopefully this will, she's leaving, by the way, although she will represent her constituency in Congress, but she'll be leaving the help. she says hopefully it will mean that the United States will sign into law where future presidential candidates will ultimately have to, by law, disclose their tax returns. So, we'll have to wait and see, and whether or not there's even an appetite by the American people if they want to learn more about Donald Trump's financial dealings.
Susan Tehrani, on top of everything for us, WION's US correspondent. Thanks very much joining us today from New York City. Now, America's top doctor, Anthony Fauci, is stepping back from his position as the head of the US National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He's a critical figure at the US National Institutes of Health and has been for decades. He spoke behind the White House lectern on Tuesday for one final time, participating in a COVID-19 briefing for reporters at the tail end of his 50 years in public service. And in keeping with the febrile times in which we live here, controversy erupted in the White House press room after a journalist who was not called on by the White House press secretary shouted a question about the origins of COVID-19 and what Fauci had personally done to investigate the issue. At least one other reporter then started shouting similar questions at Fauci, questions that the White House believes are ideologically driven by right-leaning news outlets in America. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre then struggled to restore order.
We have a process here. I'm not calling out on people who yell. And you're being disrespectful to your colleagues, and you're being disrespectful to our guests. I will not call on you if you yell. And also, you're taking time off the clock because Dr. Fauci has to leave in a couple of minutes. I'm done. I'm not getting into a back and forth with you. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Dr. Fauci,
but she's
only
asking a
30
great question.
Go ahead, Jeremy. Go ahead, Jeremy.
She's asking a valid question. You ask your question, you should allow her to ask a
Jeremy.
question. She's asking a valid
Jeremy.
question, Dr. Fauci, on the origin of COVID-19.
It is not your turn. It is not your turn.
You come on the same people. That's the thing. You can't read a press briefing. You need to call from people across the room. She has a valid question. She's asking about the origin of COVID-19.
I hear the question.
And Dr. Fauci is the best person to answer
I
that
hear
question.
your question, but we're not doing this the way you want it. This is the disrespectful. It is. I'm done. Simon, I'm done. Simon, I'm done. I'm done with you right now. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. You're taking time away from your colleagues.
The origins of COVID have been a hotly contested topic, while authorities in China have linked early COVID cases to a crowded wet market in Wuhan. There have been some reports of evidence that the virus emerged from a lab in China. The lab leak theory resurfaced after Fauci's emails were accessed, with his critics contending that he and other top scientists tried to dismiss the lab leak theory without conducting sufficient research. Reports also suggested that they may have taken this measure to preserve international harmony, but multiple expert analyses have now shown that the virus outbreak was almost certainly not the result of a lab leak, and that COVID-19 did originate in the Wuhan wet market and then spread from there. China has also repeatedly denied the lab leak theory, and that theory was dismissed by a WHO report published in June. Researchers described the possibility of the virus originating in a lab as highly unlikely, but said they would remain open to further evidence that may emerge in the future. Inflation here in the US has reached its highest levels for decades, and that could deal a blow to traditional Thanksgiving festivities this week. A new survey suggests that the cost this year of a traditional turkey and trimmings Thanksgiving dinner has risen by 20%. Our Thanksgiving celebrating correspondent, Susan Tehrani, a very busy woman today, gets you all the details.
Spending time with family and friends at Thanksgiving remains important for many Americans, and this year the cost of the meal is also top of mind.
A lot of changes. The group size has gotten a lot smaller. due to the price of the turkeys, the food, everything is just way too expensive. So we had to cut down on a lot and had to invite a lot less people.
Thanksgiving dinner has become 20% more expensive over the past year. Rosalind Dickens, who co-owns a turkey farm, says even her longtime customers are thinking twice before making a purchase this year.
The prices of the turkeys are astronomical. I'm embarrassed to tell people, but there's no way around it.
According to Farm Bureau's 37th annual survey, the average cost to feed 10 people this Thanksgiving is $64.05, which is $10.74 more than last year. The survey, conducted by over 200 volunteer shoppers who checked prices in person and online across the country, proved that the holiday dinner is anything but inflation-proof.
As for some good news, well, not everything on the Thanksgiving shopping list is significantly more expensive. Cranberries, for example, had a good harvest year and were less than 5% more expensive from early September to early November this year.
Lower production and higher costs for labor, transportation, and items are part of the reason for high prices. Analysts say rough weather and the war in Ukraine are also contributors. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
There have been more dramatic scenes in China at Foxconn's biggest plant. For the second time in a month, it's reported that hundreds of workers have streamed out of dormitories at the plant in the central city of Zhengzhou, this time clashing with security personnel. Tensions have run high over tough restrictions that have been put into place at the plant to quash an outbreak of COVID-19. The campus is home to the world's largest iPhone factory, where many chanted, "Give us our pay." It's reported that the workers outnumbered security guards. The protest started overnight over unpaid wages and fears of spreading infection. Several workers were injured and anti-riot police arrived on the scene to restore order. The clash also reflects a build-up of tensions since the lockdown began in October. Workers say they've been plunged into isolation and even forced to subsist on Spartan meals. Many fled the plant on foot last month. Foxconn and the local authorities have tried to control the situation by offering bonuses and other perks to the workers who are willing to remain working at the factory. A major manufacturer for Apple, the Chinese government even called on former soldiers to contribute at the plant. It manufactures an estimated 4 in 5 of Apple's latest generation handsets and the vast majority of the highest-end iPhone 14 Pro units. Apple has already warned of disruption to its iPhone production just ahead of the peak holiday season, with shopping in the United States and elsewhere about to pick up. Indigenous groups in the US and Canada are making efforts to restore the bison population across North America. This comes more than a century after European settlers drove the species to near extinction.
Tens of millions of the bison once roamed North America's Great Plains. They were central to the lives of indigenous people. They lived here before the European colonizers arrived.
At one time, there were millions of buffalo that roamed North America, and all of these tribes, relied on them at some point, whether that was for food or shelter or ceremonies.
However, this balance was disrupted by the European settlers as they started slaughtering the great herds. The ecological and cultural disaster can be seen in haunting photos from that era. These photos show a horrifying sight of piles of buffalo skulls. The colonizers and their firearms brought a new level of industry to the enterprise as hunters. The US troops and the tourists shot bison, and a commercial industry used it for their parts in machinery, fertilizer, and also clothing. By 1889, only a few bison remained. 10 in central Montana, 20 in central Colorado, and few remaining in Wyoming. 200 in Yellowstone National Park and some 500 in Alberta.
And it forced us as Indigenous people to move to reservations and, completely change our lifestyle. Fast forward 150 years, buffalo are resilient. Buffalo are resilient, just like we are as Indigenous people.
Fast forward 150 years. The Intertribal Buffalo Council has now restored around 1,000 bison to 28,000 acres of hills near the Nebraska-South Dakota border. About 82 tribes across the US and Canada currently have an estimate of 20,000 bison in 65 herds. And the numbers continue to grow with the desire among Native Americans to reclaim the stewardship of the animal.
We're in contact with all of our tribes, and we're able to take those animals and redistribute those to tribes to either enhance their herd or start a new herd.
At Badlands National Park, around 100 wild bison go through health checkups and are corralled ahead of transfer to a new home. They are then loaded into trailers and shipped to Rosebud Reservation. The other long-term dream of some Native Americans has been to bring back the bison on a scale rivaling herds that roamed the continent in numbers that shaped the landscape itself. Other common reasons are increasing food security, reclaiming sovereignty, and improving land management. But the ongoing slaughter of the bison is still a major challenge. However, the scale on which the animal is used for commercial purposes is relatively smaller now. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Finally from us today, the World Cup in Qatar, where Belgium start their campaign for a first world title today against surprise qualifiers Canada. They're playing on football's exalted stage for the first time since 1986. Belgium are the second-ranked team in world football, but the last 8 years have not delivered the trophies that many pundits expected. Belgium's golden generation exists largely on paper now, with even those picked by long-serving manager Roberto Martinez in the twilight of their careers. Soccer experts say Kevin De Bruyne remains world-class and will be at the centre of whatever moves play out in the middle of the pitch. But he is the only constant. Romelu Lukaku has largely been injured and hasn't trained these past few days, while Eden Hazard is finally injury-free but doesn't have games under his belt. Martinez is sticking to his 3-4-3 has stuck to his 3-4-3 formation over the last 6 years, but his ageing defence is a concern despite the presence of Thibaut Courtois in goal.
First of all, is a huge respect for what Canada has achieved, because first of all, when you finish top of the group and ahead of national teams like USA and Mexico, that means that there is a real substance. It's not a coincidence that you arrive into a World Cup. We know how difficult it is to get to the World Cup. In Canadian terms, it's the second time. First time was in '86, so straight away you know that this generation has something very, very special. They look like a team. They never look like a group of players coming together to represent the national team.
Canada has never scored a goal at the World Cup, but they outscored the USA and Mexico and qualified ahead of them for Qatar. Bayern Munich defender Alphonso Davies is their star player, and he plays in a much more advanced and attacking role for his national side. He's faced fitness concerns of late, but whether he plays or not, his side is not expected to back down and will press their opponents further up the pitch. I still can't believe that Argentina-Saudi Arabia scoreline. That is WION Live broadcast for this Wednesday. The programme will be back again live from Washington, D.C. at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for your company, and I'll see you again soon. Meanwhile, stay tuned for all your news updates to WION, where the world is one.